Millionaire dumps fiancé for a street musician. Her revenge is unbelievable. The cafe buzzed with the low hum of conversations and the occasional clatter of dishes. Amelia sat at her usual table by the window, her laptop open, reviewing a presentation for a meeting that she was convinced would determine the next phase of her career. She was an organized, driven woman, the type who always had a plan. Her fiancé, Jonathan, often teased her about her meticulous nature, saying she could probably plan their lives down to the minute if given the chance. She smiled at the memory of his teasing, but it didn't linger long. Her gaze drifted to the large diamond ring on her finger, catching the sunlight. It symbolized everything she thought she and Jonathan had built, a partnership based on mutual respect and love. They'd been together for 5 years, supporting each other's dreams and ambitions. Or so she thought. Across town, Jonathan leaned against his sleek sports car parked near a crowded street corner. He wasn't at work, though that's what Amelia assumed. Instead, he was listening intently to the soulful voice of a street musician. The young woman strummed her guitar with practiced ease, her voice filling the air with a raw, unpolished beauty that drew a small crowd. Jonathan's eyes never left her. Her name was Lily, and there was an air of effortless freedom about her. She didn't care about societal expectations or the weight of responsibilities. She was everything Jonathan felt he had lost in his carefully curated life. A life filled with board meetings, social engagements, and the pressures of maintaining an image. Something about Lily's carefree spirit mesmerized him, pulling him into her orbit. "You're really talented," he said after she finished her song, offering her a charming smile. He wasn't used to rejection, and the way her eyes flicked up at him with mild amusement only intrigued him further. "Thanks," Lily replied, her voice light. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." Jonathan stayed a little longer, chatting with her between songs. He didn't mention Amelia, didn't think it mattered in that moment. It was just harmless conversation, he told himself. But deep down, a spark had been lit. That evening, Amelia set the table for two in their shared apartment. Jonathan was late, which wasn't unusual given his demanding work schedule. She glanced at the clock and checked her phone, but there was no message. A pang of annoyance flickered through her, but she brushed it aside. He always had a good reason. When he finally walked through the door, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled, he offered her a sheepish smile. "Sorry I'm late. Busy day?" Amelia smiled back, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I figured as much. Let's eat before it gets cold." They ate in relative silence, Amelia occasionally asking about his day. Jonathan gave vague answers, his mind clearly elsewhere. She didn't press him, assuming he was just tired. Weeks passed and Jonathan's absences became more frequent. Amelia began to notice subtle changes. His increasing distraction, the way he seemed to guard his phone more closely, and the lack of warmth in their interactions. She tried to convince herself it was just a rough patch, that all relationships went through periods of distance. But the gnawing feeling in her stomach wouldn't go away. One afternoon, while cleaning their apartment, Amelia stumbled across a receipt tucked into one of Jonathan's jacket pockets. It was for an expensive restaurant she didn't recall visiting with him. The date was from a night he had claimed to be working late. Her heart sank as a swirl of doubt and anger clouded her thoughts. She didn't confront him immediately, instead deciding to wait and see if he would offer an explanation. Jonathan, meanwhile, had been spending more and more time with Lily. Their connection deepened, or so he thought. She spoke of dreams and freedom, of escaping the grind and finding joy in the simple things. It was intoxicating. He began questioning everything about his life with Amelia, wondering if he had been living a lie all along. "You're always so free," Jonathan said one evening as they shared a bottle of cheap wine on a park bench. "I envy that." Lily chuckled, shaking her head. "Freedom comes with its own set of challenges. But I'd rather live authentically than feel trapped in someone else's expectations." Her words hit Jonathan harder than he expected. Was that what he'd been doing? Living out a script he hadn't written for himself? It was a thought he couldn't shake. The confrontation came sooner than Amelia had anticipated. One evening, Jonathan returned home later than usual, the faint scent of perfume clinging to his jacket. Amelia, unable to hold back any longer, asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Jonathan, where were you tonight?" He froze, his back to her as he hung up his jacket. "At work." "Why?" "Don't lie to me," she said, her voice trembling. "I found the receipt. I know you've been seeing someone." Jonathan turned slowly, guilt flickering across his face. "Amelia, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're cheating on me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," she shot back. "You're either faithful or you're not." Jonathan hesitated, then said the words that shattered her world. "I think we need a break." Amelia stared at him, disbelief and heartbreak crashing over her. "A break? After everything we've built together? After 5 years?" "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I feel like I've lost myself, Amelia. And Lily, she makes me feel alive again." "Lily?" Amelia repeated, the name foreign and venomous on her tongue. "The street musician?" Jonathan didn't respond, which was answer enough. The silence that followed Jonathan's confession was deafening. Amelia stood there, frozen, unable to process the depth of his betrayal. She had given him everything, her love, her support, her trust, and now he was throwing it all away for a fleeting infatuation with a woman he barely knew. "Get out," she finally said, her voice low but steady. Jonathan looked at her, surprised by her composure. "Amelia, let's talk about this." "I didn't mean..." "Get out," she repeated, her words sharper this time. "You don't get to destroy everything we've built and then act like we can talk it out." Jonathan hesitated, but the look in her eyes told him there was no room for negotiation. He grabbed his jacket and left without another word, leaving Amelia alone in the apartment they had once shared. The following weeks were a blur of pain and numbness for Amelia. She avoided friends and family, unable to face their questions or pity. The only thing that kept her going was work. Diving headfirst into her projects gave her a sense of purpose, however fleeting. But even work couldn't distract her from the reminders of Jonathan. Every corner of the apartment held a memory of their life together. The coffee mugs they had picked out together. The photo frames on the wall. The faint scent of his cologne lingering in the closet. It was unbearable. One evening, as she sat alone on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, she came across a video on social media. It was a clip of Lily performing on the street, her soulful voice drawing a crowd. And there, in the background, was Jonathan, clapping along with a proud smile. Amelia's chest tightened as a wave of anger surged through her. How dare he flaunt their relationship so publicly, as if their years together meant nothing. She slammed her phone down, her hands trembling. That night, she cried herself to sleep, but as the tears dried, they left behind a new feeling, determination. Jonathan had underestimated her. He thought he could discard her like she was nothing, but he was wrong. She would rebuild her life, and she would make sure he regretted ever betraying her. Amelia began to channel her energy into reclaiming her identity. She signed up for a fitness class, something she had always wanted to try but never made time for. She reached out to an old friend who ran a nonprofit and offered to help with fundraising efforts. Slowly but surely she started to feel like herself again. But her journey wasn't just about healing, it was about taking back control. She began researching Jonathan's company and its dealings, uncovering information she hadn't paid much attention to before. She learned about his connections, his vulnerabilities, and, most importantly, his rivals. Meanwhile, Jonathan's relationship with Lily was not as idyllic as he had imagined. The initial spark that had drawn him to her began to fade as reality set in. Lily's carefree lifestyle, which had seemed so appealing at first, started to clash with Jonathan's structured world. She didn't understand the pressures of his career, and he didn't understand her resistance to the luxuries he offered. "Why don't you just let me take care of you?" Jonathan asked one evening, frustrated by her reluctance to move into his apartment. "Because I don't want to be taken care of," Lily replied, her tone sharp. "I don't need your money, Jonathan. I need you to respect me for who I am." Their arguments became more frequent, and Jonathan found himself missing the stability he had once taken for granted with Amelia. But his pride kept him from reaching out to her. He had made his choice and he would live with it. One day, Amelia received an unexpected call from a journalist. The woman introduced herself as a reporter investigating Jonathan's company for potential misconduct. She had heard about Amelia's breakup and thought she might have insight into his business practices. At first, Amelia was hesitant to get involved. She didn't want to stoop to Jonathan's level. But as the reporter explained her suspicions, Amelia realized that this was about more than revenge. It was about holding Jonathan accountable. She agreed to meet with the reporter, providing her with information and insights she had gained during her time with Jonathan. She shared details about his dealings with certain clients and his tendency to cut corners to maximize profits. The reporter thanked her and promised to keep her involvement confidential. As the weeks went by, Amelia began to see the fruits of her efforts. The story about Jonathan's company broke in a major publication, detailing allegations of unethical practices. Investors started to pull out and the company's stock value plummeted. Jonathan was livid. He spent hours on damage control, meeting with lawyers and public relations teams to salvage his reputation. But no matter what he did, the damage had been done. His name, once synonymous with success, was now mired in controversy. Amelia, on the other hand, was thriving. She had taken on a new role at her nonprofit, spearheading a campaign that gained national attention. Her confidence had returned, and with it, a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as Amelia was leaving a gala for her nonprofit, she spotted Jonathan across the room. He looked tired, his once polished appearance slightly disheveled. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them moved. Jonathan approached her hesitantly, his expression a mix of regret and longing. "Amelia," he said softly, "you look amazing." "Thank you," she replied, her tone polite but distant. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." "For everything," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Amelia studied him for a moment before responding. "I appreciate that, Jonathan. But I've moved on. I hope you find what you're looking for." With that, she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the crowd. Jonathan stood frozen in the middle of the crowded gala, watching as Amelia walked away with her head held high. She exuded confidence, grace, and an aura he hadn't seen in her before. It struck him how much she had changed, how much stronger she seemed without him. It was a realization he wasn't ready to face, and yet, he couldn't ignore the pang of regret settling in his chest. Meanwhile, Amelia didn't look back. She wasn't walking away for effect. She simply didn't need validation from him anymore. The evening had been a triumph in more ways than one. Not only had her nonprofit's initiative raised significant funds, but it had also attracted the attention of key influencers who admired her work and vision. Amelia was no longer just Jonathan's fiancée, she was a force in her own right. As the fallout from the investigative article continued, Jonathan's professional life took a hit he couldn't recover from. The board of directors at his company called an emergency meeting, and the atmosphere was tense as they reviewed the damage. Investors were pulling out at an alarming rate, and the once thriving company was on the brink of collapse. "This is a disaster," one board member said, glaring at Jonathan. "We trusted you to uphold the reputation of this company, and now we're paying the price for your recklessness." Jonathan clenched his jaw, trying to remain composed. "I'm doing everything I can to fix this." "Fixing this might not be enough," another member interjected. "We need a leader who can restore trust, and right now that doesn't seem to be you." The words hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. He had always prided himself on his ability to command respect, but now he was being stripped of the very foundation of his identity. The meeting ended with a decision to temporarily suspend Jonathan's leadership pending further review. As he left the office, Jonathan couldn't help but think about how far he had fallen. The cracks in his relationship with Lily were growing wider, his career was in shambles, and the life he had once taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. Amelia's life, on the other hand, was blossoming. She had recently been invited to speak at a conference about her nonprofit work, a recognition that both humbled and exhilarated her. She spent hours preparing her speech, determined to make an impact. The conference was held in a grand hall filled with influential figures from various industries. As Amelia took the stage, she felt a wave of nerves but quickly steadied herself. She began to speak about resilience, community, and the importance of channeling pain into purpose. "My journey hasn't been easy," she said, her voice steady but heartfelt. "There were moments when I felt like I had lost everything. But what I learned is that loss can be the starting point for something greater. It's not about what's taken from you, it's about what you choose to build in its place." The audience erupted into applause as she concluded her speech, and Amelia couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She had reclaimed her voice, her power, and her sense of self. And she wasn't done yet. Back in Jonathan's world, things went from bad to worse. Lily had grown increasingly distant, frustrated by the turmoil surrounding him. One evening, as they sat in his dimly lit apartment, the tension between them reached its breaking point. "I didn't sign up for this," Lily said, her arms crossed. "I thought you were different, but all I see is someone who's lost control of his life." Jonathan frowned, his frustration bubbling over. "And what about you, Lily? You think running away from everything is the answer? Life isn't some free-spirited dream." "Maybe not," she shot back. "But at least I'm not dragging other people down with me." Her words cut deep, and for the first time, Jonathan realized how much he had alienated the people around him. Lily left that night, and Jonathan didn't stop her. He couldn't muster the energy to fight for something he knew was already broken. Amelia, meanwhile, was taking the next steps in her journey. She had started collaborating with other nonprofits and businesses, creating a network of support for her initiatives. One of her most promising partnerships was with a tech company that wanted to develop a platform for connecting underserved communities with resources and opportunities. The CEO of the company, Mark, was a charismatic and thoughtful man who quickly became one of Amelia's most trusted allies. Their partnership was strictly professional at first, but over time, a genuine friendship began to form. Mark admired Amelia's resilience and passion, and she found his support and encouragement invaluable. One evening after a particularly successful event, Mark invited Amelia for dinner to celebrate. As they talked over glasses of wine, Amelia found herself laughing more freely than she had in months. For the first time she felt a spark of hope, not just for her career but for the possibility of love again. Jonathan couldn't ignore the changes in Amelia's life. He had tried to avoid news about her, but she seemed to be everywhere, featured in articles, speaking at events and receiving accolades for her work. Each headline was a reminder of what he had lost, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Jonathan came across a video of Amelia's conference speech. As he listened to her talk about resilience and finding purpose, he felt a pang of regret so deep it was almost physical. She had become everything he had always admired, and he hadn't been there to see it. Amelia's focus remained on her goals. She had no interest in revisiting the past or seeking validation from Jonathan. Her work had become her passion, and she was determined to make a difference. But she wasn't done proving to herself, and to the world, that she was more than the woman Jonathan had left behind. Months passed and Amelia's star continued to rise. She had become a sought-after speaker, her story resonating with countless people who admired her resilience. The platform she had helped develop with Mark's tech company launched successfully, gaining significant traction and praise for its innovative approach to empowering underserved communities. Amelia was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Jonathan, on the other hand, was barely holding on. The board of directors at his company had voted to strip him of his leadership position permanently, citing a lack of trust and confidence. His reputation, once untouchable, was now tarnished beyond repair. He found himself at a crossroads, unsure of how to rebuild his life. One evening, while sitting alone in his once impressive penthouse, Jonathan made a decision. He would reach out to Amelia, not to win her back but to apologize. For everything. He had avoided facing her for too long, and the guilt had become unbearable. Amelia was in the middle of a meeting when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She ignored it at first, but when it rang again she excused herself and stepped into the hallway to answer. "Hello," she said, her tone cautious. "Amelia, it's Jonathan." His voice was hesitant, almost unrecognizable. She stiffened, the memories of their last conversation flooding back. "What do you want, Jonathan?" I need to talk to you," he said. "Not about us. Just about everything. Please." Amelia hesitated. Part of her wanted to hang up, but another part, the part that had grown stronger and wiser, knew that closure might be worth hearing him out. "Fine," she said finally. "But this doesn't mean anything." "Thank you," Jonathan said, relief evident in his voice. "Can we meet tomorrow? At the cafe where we used to go?" "Tomorrow," Amelia agreed, then hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, Amelia arrived at the cafe, her heart steady despite the unease of seeing Jonathan again. He was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked different, tired, worn, and far from the confident man she had once known. "Amelia," he said as she sat down. "Thank you for coming." "What do you want, Jonathan?" she asked, her tone direct. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For the way I treated you, for the way I ended things. You didn't deserve any of it." Amelia studied him, her expression unreadable. "You're right. I didn't." Jonathan nodded, accepting her words without protest. "I thought I knew what I wanted, but I was wrong. I hurt you and I hurt myself in the process." Amelia leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. "You made your choices, Jonathan. And I've made mine. I'm not the same person you left behind." "I know," he said quietly. "I see that. And I'm proud of you, Amelia. You've become someone truly incredible." She didn't reply immediately, her thoughts swirling. "I appreciate the apology," she said finally. "But I don't need your validation. I've built a life I'm proud of, and I've done it without you." Jonathan nodded, a bittersweet smile on his lips. "I know. And I'm glad. You deserve everything good in this world." Amelia stood, her confidence radiating. "I hope you find your path, Jonathan. But I've already found mine." With that, she walked away, leaving him to reflect on the choices that had brought him to this point. As Amelia stepped outside, the cool evening air filled her lungs, refreshing her spirit. She didn't feel anger or sadness, only relief. Closure had finally come, and with it, the freedom to fully embrace her future. She pulled out her phone and texted Mark, "Dinner still on for tonight? I've got something to celebrate." His reply came almost instantly, "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Amelia smiled, her steps light as she made her way down the bustling street. Her life was no longer defined by what she had lost but by what she had gained, a sense of purpose, a newfound strength, and the promise of brighter days ahead. Amelia arrived at her apartment with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Meeting Jonathan had been a reminder of a past she had left behind, but it also solidified how far she had come. She thought back to the woman she used to be, unsure of her worth, bending over backward to accommodate someone who took her for granted. That version of Amelia felt like a distant memory now. Her phone buzzed again and she glanced at the screen. It was Mark, confirming their dinner plans. A warm smile spread across her face. Mark had become a steady presence in her life, a grounding force as she navigated her new path. He never pushed, never demanded, he simply showed up, offering encouragement and support. As she prepared for the evening, Amelia couldn't help but reflect on the stark difference between Mark and Jonathan. Where Jonathan had seen her as an accessory to his life, Mark saw her as an equal, someone with her own dreams and ambitions. It was a refreshing change, one she wasn't ready to fully embrace yet, but it gave her hope. Across town, Jonathan sat in his empty apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey. He couldn't shake the image of Amelia walking away from him earlier that day, her confidence and poise a stark contrast to the woman he had once known. He felt a pang of regret, not just for losing her but for the man he had become. His phone buzzed with a notification and he glanced at the screen. It was a news article about Amelia's nonprofit, highlighting its recent success and her role as a driving force behind it. The headline read, "Rising Star Amelia Sinclair Leads Transformative Community Effort." Jonathan read the article in silence, his emotions a mix of pride and bitterness. She was thriving without him and he had no one to blame but himself. Meanwhile, Amelia's evening with Mark was unfolding beautifully. They met at a cozy restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, the kind of place where conversations felt more meaningful. Over dinner they discussed everything from work to their favorite books, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Mark listened intently as Amelia shared her vision for expanding the nonprofit, his admiration evident in his expression. "You're an incredible woman, Amelia," he said, his tone sincere. "The work you're doing, it's changing lives." Amelia blushed slightly, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over her. "Thank you, Mark. That means a lot." As the evening progressed, Amelia found herself relaxing more than she had in months. Mark's presence felt natural, like an old friend she hadn't realized she needed. But even as she enjoyed his company, she knew she needed to take things slow. Her heart wasn't ready for anything new, not yet. Jonathan's life, on the other hand, continued to unravel. His reputation was in tatters, his career effectively over. The friends who had once surrounded him had disappeared, unwilling to associate themselves with his tarnished name. One evening, he wandered the city streets, searching for something, anything, that might give him a sense of direction. He passed by a group of street musicians, their laughter and music filling the air. Among them he recognized Lily. She was laughing with her friends, her guitar slung over her shoulder. She looked happy, carefree in a way that made Jonathan's chest tighten. He hesitated, unsure whether to approach her, but before he could decide, she spotted him. "Jonathan," she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. "What are you doing here?" "I was just walking," he said, his voice subdued. How have you been?" Lily shrugged. "I've been fine. Better, actually. I'm focusing on my music and myself." "What about you?" Jonathan hesitated, the truth too raw to share. "I'm figuring things out." Lily nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good luck with that." She turned back to her friends, leaving Jonathan standing alone in the glow of the streetlights. For the first time, he realized that his attempts to escape his old life had only left him more lost than ever. Amelia's life, by contrast, was gaining momentum. The platform she had developed with Mark's company was gaining national attention, and she was invited to speak at a prestigious conference on social innovation. The invitation felt like validation for all the hard work she had poured into her mission. As she prepared her speech, Amelia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the moments of doubt, they had all been stepping stones to something greater. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, building a life that was entirely her own. Her speech was a resounding success, earning her a standing ovation and opening new doors for partnerships and collaborations. As she stood on the stage, looking out at the audience, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. This was her purpose, her calling, and she was finally living it. Amelia returned home after the conference, her heart full but her mind racing. The event had been a monumental success, and she couldn't ignore the flood of messages she'd received. Congratulatory notes from colleagues, inquiries from potential partners, and even a few heartfelt letters from people inspired by her story. For the first time, she felt like her pain had been transformed into something powerful and meaningful. But there was still a lingering feeling she couldn't quite place. It wasn't sadness or regret, but something quieter, an awareness of the loose ends in her story that remained unresolved. She brushed the thought aside, choosing instead to focus on her next steps. Her journey wasn't over yet. Across the city, Jonathan was finally beginning to grasp the gravity of his choices. Days turned into weeks, and the silence in his life grew deafening. Without the constant bustle of work, his days were filled with long stretches of nothingness. He tried to fill the void with distractions, but the guilt and regret were inescapable. One afternoon, he decided to visit the community center Amelia had spoken about during their last encounter. He didn't know what he was looking for, closure, perhaps, or a way to make amends. As he walked through the brightly lit halls, he was struck by the energy of the place. Volunteers bustled about, kids laughed as they worked on art projects, and the walls were adorned with posters celebrating community achievements. It was a stark reminder of the kind of life Amelia had built, one rooted in connection, growth, and purpose. Jonathan felt out of place, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. "Can I help you?" a voice asked, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see a woman in her mid-30s wearing a volunteer badge. "I was just looking around," he said awkwardly. She smiled warmly. "Well, you're welcome to stay. We're always looking for extra hands if you're interested." Jonathan hesitated, the idea catching him off guard. Volunteering? It wasn't something he'd ever considered, but then again, his old ways hadn't exactly worked out. "I'll think about it," he said, offering a small smile before leaving the building. Meanwhile, Amelia's partnership with Mark continued to thrive. Their platform had expanded to include new features, and they were in talks to bring the initiative to several other cities. Mark's unwavering support made Amelia feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She trusted him, not just professionally but as someone who truly believed in her vision. One evening, after a particularly productive meeting, Mark surprised her with a gesture that left her speechless. He had arranged for the community center to host a special event showcasing the impact of their platform. The event would feature stories from people whose lives had been changed, giving Amelia the chance to see the fruits of her labor up close. "Mark, this is incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You've earned it, Amelia," he replied. "This is just the beginning." As they worked together on the event, Amelia couldn't ignore the growing warmth between them. She wasn't ready to label it yet, but there was no denying that Mark had become an important part of her life. Jonathan, meanwhile, found himself returning to the community center. At first, it was just to observe, to absorb the atmosphere of a world so different from his own. But over time he began to feel a pull, a desire to be part of something bigger than himself. He started volunteering, albeit reluctantly at first. He helped with small tasks, like organizing supplies or setting up events. The work was humbling, and it forced him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. Slowly he began to feel a sense of purpose, though it was faint and unfamiliar. One day, as he was helping clean up after an event, he overheard two volunteers talking about Amelia. His ears perked up as they spoke about her upcoming event at the center. "She's amazing," one of them said. "I've never seen anyone so dedicated." Jonathan felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Admiration, perhaps, or regret. He wasn't sure why he was drawn to the idea of seeing her again, but the thought planted itself firmly in his mind. Amelia was busy preparing for the event, unaware that Jonathan had decided to attend. She poured her energy into every detail, determined to make it a night to remember. The stories she had collected from the platform's users were powerful and raw, a testament to the impact of her work. The evening arrived and the community center buzzed with excitement. People from all walks of life gathered to celebrate the initiative, their faces alight with hope and gratitude. Amelia stood near the stage, greeting attendees and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Jonathan entered quietly, keeping to the edges of the crowd. He watched as Amelia moved through the room, her presence commanding yet approachable. She radiated a confidence that both inspired and intimidated him. He didn't know what he expected from the night, but he knew he needed to be there. The energy in the community center was electric. The room was filled with people from different walks of life, volunteers, beneficiaries of the platform, and even local leaders who had come to support Amelia's initiative. The stage was adorned with a simple but elegant banner that read, "Celebrating Change, a night of resilience and hope." Amelia was everywhere at once, greeting attendees, checking on the volunteers, and making sure every detail was perfect. Mark was at her side, a calm and steady presence, helping where needed but always giving Amelia the spotlight. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. Jonathan lingered at the back, his hands shoved into his pockets. He felt out of place among the crowd but couldn't bring himself to leave. He watched as Amelia worked the room, her confidence and warmth drawing people to her like a magnet. She was a force, and seeing her like this stirred something deep within him, a mix of admiration and regret. As the evening progressed, the event moved into its most anticipated part, the storytelling session. One by one, individuals who had benefited from Amelia's platform took the stage to share their journeys. Each story was different but equally powerful, tales of struggle, resilience, and newfound hope. Jonathan found himself drawn in despite himself. The stories reminded him of the world beyond his own, a world he had often ignored in favor of his own ambitions. The gratitude and humility of the speakers struck a chord he hadn't expected. When Amelia finally took the stage, the room fell silent. She stood at the podium, her expression both confident and emotional. "Tonight is not about me," she began, her voice steady. "It's about all of you. It's about the courage it takes to face challenges head-on, the strength it takes to rebuild, and the power of community to transform lives." Her words were simple but carried the weight of her own journey. She spoke about her struggles, though without naming names or delving into unnecessary details. Instead, she focused on the lessons she had learned, about resilience, purpose, and the importance of lifting others as you rise. Jonathan felt a lump in his throat as he listened. He had always known Amelia was strong, but seeing her like this, standing tall and inspiring a room full of people, was something else entirely. For the first time, he realized just how much he had underestimated her. After her speech, Amelia stepped off the stage to thunderous applause. Mark was there to greet her with a hug, his pride evident. "You were incredible," he said, his voice warm. "Thank you," she replied, her heart full. But as she looked out at the crowd, her eyes landed on a familiar face in the back of the room. Her breath hitched as she recognized Jonathan, standing alone and watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, their eyes locked, and the noise of the room faded into the background. Amelia felt a rush of emotions, surprise, anger, and something softer she didn't want to name. She quickly looked away, turning her attention back to Mark and the other attendees. Jonathan stayed for the rest of the event, though he kept his distance. He watched as Amelia mingled with the crowd, her laughter and genuine warmth lighting up the room. It was clear she had built a life that no longer included him, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to speak to her. As the event wound down and people began to leave, Jonathan found himself lingering near the exit. He debated whether to approach her, his nerves battling his desire for closure. Before he could decide, Amelia appeared, walking toward him with a composed but unreadable expression. "Jonathan," she said, her tone neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't plan to come," he admitted. "But I've been volunteering here recently and I heard about the event. I wanted to see." "I don't know, I guess I wanted to see you." Amelia crossed her arms, studying him. "And now that you have?" Jonathan hesitated, searching for the right words. "You're incredible, Amelia. I've always known you were strong, but seeing everything you've accomplished, it's inspiring." She tilted her head, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you. But why are you really here, Jonathan?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing your worth when I had the chance." Amelia's gaze didn't waver. "I appreciate the apology, but Jonathan, you need to understand something. My worth doesn't come from you or anyone else. I've found my strength and I've built a life I'm proud of. I don't need validation from the past." Her words stung, but Jonathan nodded. "I know. And I'm glad you found that. You deserve all of it." They stood in silence for a moment before Amelia spoke again. "I wish you well, Jonathan. Truly. But this chapter of my life is closed." Jonathan nodded once more, his expression resigned but understanding. "Take care, Amelia." "You too," she replied before turning and walking away. As Amelia stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like a balm. She felt a sense of closure, not from Jonathan's words but from her own. She had faced him, spoken her truth, and walked away without looking back. Mark was waiting for her near the parking lot, his smile warm as she approached. "Ready to go?" he asked. "More than ready," she said with a genuine smile. Together they walked into the night, leaving the echoes of the past behind. The days following the event felt like a turning point for Amelia. She was no longer haunted by the remnants of her past with Jonathan. Instead, she felt lighter, freer, and more focused than ever on the future she was building. The event had not only been a personal success but a transformative one for the community as well. Stories of its impact rippled through local news, inspiring others to get involved. Amelia and Mark's platform continued to grow, expanding to new cities and gaining recognition from national organizations. Their partnership flourished, and though they kept things professional, there was an undeniable connection simmering beneath the surface. Mark never rushed her, allowing her the space to heal and find her footing in her own time. Jonathan, on the other hand, faced a much different reality. Volunteering at the community center had given him a sense of purpose, but the weight of his mistakes lingered. He kept a low profile, focusing on rebuilding his life from the ground up. He no longer sought the validation of wealth or status. Instead, he worked quietly, hoping to find a version of himself he could respect again. One afternoon, as he sorted through supplies at the center, he overheard a conversation between two volunteers. They were talking about Amelia, her work, her resilience, and the inspiration she had become to so many. "She's proof that you can turn anything around," one of them said. "She didn't just survive, she thrived." Jonathan smiled faintly to himself. He didn't need to be part of her life to admire her journey. She had become everything he hadn't realized she could be, and he was proud of her, even from afar. Months later, Amelia stood on a stage at a national conference, addressing a packed auditorium. The platform she and Mark had built was now a national movement, connecting thousands of people to opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. Her speech was heartfelt, focusing on the power of resilience and community. "Every challenge we face is an opportunity," she said, her voice steady and strong. "An opportunity to grow, to rebuild, and to create something extraordinary. The most important thing is to believe in your ability to rise, no matter how far you've fallen." The audience erupted into applause as she stepped back from the podium, her heart swelling with pride. She had found her purpose, her voice, and her place in the world. After the conference, Mark approached her with a bouquet of flowers, his smile warm and genuine. "You were amazing," he said, handing her the bouquet. Amelia laughed softly, accepting the flowers. "Thank you. I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You could have," Mark said, his tone serious. "But I'm glad I could be part of it." They shared a moment of quiet understanding, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. Amelia knew she wasn't the same woman she had been when she met Mark, and for the first time she felt ready to embrace what was next. As Amelia and Mark left the conference hall, hand in hand, the city lights stretched out before them, a symbol of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. She had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and self-doubt, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Amelia wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And as she walked into the future, she knew that the best chapters of her story were still to come.